Yeas pour 91, 91. Nays contre 203, 203.
I'm Jerry Agar for Ezra Levant. Motion 312 to study when life begins was defeated in Ottawa. The debate, however, rages on. Some are furious that Status of Women Minister Rona Ambrose voted for the motion. Andrea Mrozek of prowomenprolife.ca is in Ottawa. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
How did you expect this vote to go?
Well, we certainly didn't expect for the motion to pass, but I think the success of the motion is that we debated abortion and unborn life in our House of Commons, and it did not burst into flames. And it was a respectful debate. There were 2 hours of debate before the vote. I think a lot of good points were raised. It was done respectfully. It was a success from my view because it had people talking, and this is what our House of Commons is meant for, to debate these important issues.
Certainly, and I am kind of at a loss as to what the people who voted no are afraid of. Are they afraid of a scientific discussion, a philosophical discussion? What's the problem?
Their positioning is illogical, and it's built up on a house of cards. They've had a good run of things since 1988 with abortion on demand available at any time throughout 9 months of pregnancy without any restrictions. And I think that they're aware that if people start to think about that, and indeed polls show people are thinking about it, a high percentage, somewhere in the 70s, I believe, of Canadians would like to see some restriction on abortion at some point, i.e. not the situation we have right now. But once Canadians start to think about that, the house of cards will fall.
Well, we'll get back to some of those numbers in just a moment, but I want to go through some of the reaction here. And first of all, we had NDP reaction. This is from Libby Davis and her reaction to Minister Ambrose.
It was very surprising and I would say shocking to see the minister responsible for the status of women voting for the motion. Her responsibility as that minister is to uphold the rights, the hard-fought rights of women in Canada. That's her responsibility, is to uphold those rights. So it was very disappointing to see her vote for the motion. Obviously, this is something that...
All right, so I don't know whether you knew this, Andrea, but apparently if you're not solidly pro-choice, you're not a real woman at all.
It is a complete and utter fiction that abortion is part of women's rights. That is not what the suffragettes fought for. Those who have fought for true women's rights in this country did not include abortion as part and parcel of that. That is a very, very recent manifestation and a very extreme one, I might add. I don't think every Canadian woman is pro-life, not by a long shot. But I think that there's a real diversity of views out there and many, many shades of gray. And it certainly is representative of the nation of Canada for our Status of Woman Minister, Rona Ambrose, to vote in favor of asking questions about this topic. If she hadn't, it would have been taking on basically a pro-abortion view, whereas now she's taken a neutral view. She said, well, let's ask the questions. Many Canadians already are. I believe that her position represents the vast majority of Canadians. And abortion rights, so-called, are not part of women's rights, not historically and not today, in my view.
Well, I always think it's about the rights of children, but certainly the reaction from much of the media yesterday reflected what we just saw from the NDP. I mean, we've got Katie O'Malley of the CBC, John Ivison of the National Post. We have columnists at the CBC, Tamitha Southey of the Globe and Mail, and they're all putting out Twitter messages that are essentially the same. I mean, let's take a look at this one from Sarah Elton. Stop the covert attempt to criminalize abortion in Canada. Tell your MP to defeat Motion 312.
Yeah, and the reason why this idea exists out there and the myth is so widespread, I think, is in no small part thanks to the media who I don't know. Some of them are coming to ask questions about it. Others, though, are just simply putting forward one side of the story, which is not the role of reporters. They should be reporting both sides of the story. And I think that a lot of women are standing up and they're frustrated. Pro Woman, Pro Life, the site that I blog at, all kinds of women coming out and they're professionals and they're in favor of women's rights. And there's no discrepancy whatsoever between being pro-life and being in favor of women's rights. So it's important to say that, but the media aren't really getting it. They're not asking those questions.
No, how do you like this one? This is maybe status of uppity women needs to be separate portfolio.
Some of the tweets I saw were ridiculous, along the lines of wanting the Minister of Agriculture to vote against corn. It's ridiculous. If you don't look at what the unborn are, then we have nothing to talk about here. But if the unborn are something, someone even, then we have a question. This was a motion and not a bill, and the fear-mongering on the other side to ensure that we don't even think about it, not even talk about it, and to clamp down on freedom of speech shows, I think, how shaky their position is.
All right, well, let's take a look at another piece of reaction, and this is interim Liberal leader Bob Rae reacting last night.
Voted in a significant majority, more than 2-1, in favor of what I consider to be a very profound Canadian consensus, and that is that the question of abortion is essentially a question of a woman making that decision, that it's not something where the state has a huge role of interference, and it's something where we have to respect women's right to choose.
All right, so that's Bob Rae taking, I guess, sort of the Liberal politically correct notion that this is how Canadians feel, a 2-1 vote against the motions. But, Andrea, we're going to see numbers here on the screen as you and I are talking. It's in fact not what polling of Canadians shows.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I think a high percentage of Canadians are, first of all, unaware of the status quo, which is that we have no law on abortion in Canada. Furthermore, unaware of the fact that this is out of sync with the rest of the Western world, the developed world. Most countries do have some law on this issue. Again, it's been a good run for really extreme, I'd say pro-abortion instead of pro-choice women in this country, or those who support abortion. It certainly is not a consensus. And what we're seeing now is the fact that it's the reality. It's not a consensus. There is no consensus on the issue of abortion. And so it keeps coming up. And it's going to continue to come up, as we saw with a recent announcement of Mark Warawa raising a motion, I believe, or a bill, I'm not sure, on sex selection abortion. Again, you start to think about what's in the womb and asking questions about when life begins, things that pro-abortion people don't want to address, and suddenly you're in trouble because it's a very complicated, complex issue then.
Thanks so much for taking the time today.
Thank you for having me.